Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be drawing this mouse eye in colour pencil. I'm beginning by using the dark sepia in the Polychromos pencils because it's a really good pencil to use that isn't too dark that you can't erase it if you need to, but it's also a really nice deep colour that you can get a good outline and map out what you need to do using a very light hand, so you can rub it out if you need to. I'm just going around the shape of the mouse's eye just to make sure that I map in the little tear ducts and the space between the eye and the fur, which is really important, and then mapping in the darkest parts of the eye that I can see. And this tends to be the bottom part. I've done a little outline of the highlight in the eye, making sure that I don't fill that in where I don't want it to, and then just making sure that I'm adding a few details. I've drawn this mouse pretty big. You can see there the scale of my thumb. You can see that the eye is quite big, so we can add quite a lot of detail, which is really great. So there was a reflection in the eye. You couldn't quite see what it was, but it was important to get these details in because this is what gives it that kind of special realism, you know, adding the sky or a reflection of the person, or, you know, just a little touch of something in the highlight of the eye that really makes it stand out and makes it look really detailed and really shiny and realistic. So just adding a little bit of red there and going in with the browns and making sure that it's not just one colour that I'm using lots of different colours, really looking at my reference photo, and then using the cold greys to blend in between because this really needs to be a smooth eye. And finally going in with the black just on a few little parts to begin with, just to make sure that I can see a difference between the black and the dark sepia. And then going in with the cold grey again to blend, adding a little bit more blue. Just being quite careful with the blue. You don't want to add too much. You don't want it to look unrealistic, like a very deep blue colour that wouldn't exist in the sky. So I'm just being very careful with that, adding a little bit more red, going in with some yellows and some browns. I'm adding a little touch of the burnt sienna to the darkest parts of the eye because there was a little bit of red in there. It wasn't just black. So it is important that you really look at your reference photo and don't go in heavy-handed with one colour. You can be quite easily mistaken that the bottom section of the eye was just black, but actually it had browns, greys, reds, everything. And this is what gives it a more rounded shape. It gives it that kind of form as opposed to a flat black surface. So just darkening up the darkest parts a little bit more, making sure that I've got a smoother edge, which I tend to struggle with a little bit. So just making sure that I'm being careful there, because the eyeball was pretty much round, darkening up the edges where the shadows are to give it that nice spherical look, and darkening up in the parts in between the highlights now that have a little bit more black, that are a little bit more outlined, so there are clearer shapes in there than I had originally. I'm using two different blacks here. The Caran Luminance black tends to have more of a matte black, and the Polychromos tends to be a little bit more shiny. So I did the matte first, adding that depth, and then using the Polychromos shiny version to go over the top, as this eyeball, they always tend to be wet and shiny looking. So this gives it a really nice finish. Darkening up those edges some more, using a very sharp pencil and using very small pencil strokes. Using blues now to add a little bit of detail into the darker highlights or the mid-tone highlights. And then going with this Museum Aquarelle pencil. It's fantastic. I think it's one of the best whites. The great thing about Pastelmat is that you can actually apply light over dark, so you don't have to worry too much about leaving all of the highlights free, although I do like to leave the brightest highlights. Although this was a yellow paper, I knew I could go on top with a white pencil and it would show up really nicely, which is such a bonus when you are drawing with colour pencils. Darkening up some more, so it's really important to get those shadows as dark as they need to be. You can only tell this usually when you've added some of the other parts. So now I'd added the highlight in the whitest part of the eye. I could see that the darkest parts needed to be darkened a little bit more, just to make sure that it was all, that correct tone. And adding some of the cold greys around the outside, there was a little bit of a space, as with most animal eyes, in between the eye and the fur starting. So it's important that you leave that free and don't fill that in, because that will give it a much more realistic look. So it's really, really essential that you look at your reference photo and pick out all of these little tiny details. Going into the corner of the eye and just mapping out some of the shadows there, just to give the eye a little bit of context, because it does look a bit strange sitting on the paper there. So just adding a few little indications of where the fur is going to be, a few directional furs, just so I know where I'm going, mostly about mapping out the next stage of the eye. So a very, very light hand, and now going in with a cold grey and making sure that it's nice and smooth. Again, you can see on the Pastelmat it really shows up very, very nicely, the lighter colours. So if you haven't used Pastelmat before, then it's a really, really good one to try. It uses kind of different rules. You don't have to have such a sharp pencil, although it's quite nice in the eye area to have a sharp pencil just to get those tiny details in, but you don't have to, and you can go light over dark, which I've mentioned before. So just going in with the dark sepia again and some of the darker cold greys, just building up those colours, making sure that I'm adding as I go along, going from light to dark, and using a very, very light hand, so I'm not going in too heavy-handed, too dark too soon, knowing that I can build it up and build up the different colours of the grey. So you can see I've added a little bit of a shape around the eye. I'm just adding a few last details, and the next stage would be to go on to the fur, which will be in the next video. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did, and I will see you in the next one.